Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. It was a typical Tuesday morning in late 2022 when I got a bizarre message from my buddy Lucas. We had been close friends for years, and he was always cautious with technology, so the link he sent via Facebook Messenger to a group chat with literally everyone we knew raised some red flags. It looked like a shady phishing attempt, so I didn't open it initially. Not long after, an email from Lucas landed in my inbox, containing the same mysterious link along with some ominous comments. The recipient list was vast, including his wife Sophia's workplace, her family members, his relatives, and even people I didn't recognize. Realizing this was legitimate, I clicked the link. The hastily assembled website displayed a trove of incriminating content, screenshots, videos, and chat logs chronicling Sophia's torrid affair with a former high school classmate. Explicit videos of her intimacy with her lover, accompanied by Lucas's scathing captions and unsavory remarks about their behavior. But what truly stung were the demeaning comments Sophia made about Lucas, mocking his masculinity while praising her lover's prowess. Alarmed, I called Lucas immediately. He was drunk, emotionally distraught, and had spent the entire night creating this damning website fueled by liquor and resentment towards women. Despite my attempts to reason with him and prevent further escalation, Sophia burst in, having been alerted by her family members who saw the website. A heated argument erupted, with Lucas branding Sophia a derogatory term as she desperately pleaded. The call abruptly ended, but the website remained accessible, accumulating hundreds of views from acquaintances witnessing Sophia's indiscretions. Lucas had meticulously gathered evidence through a keylogger, capturing Sophia's illicit online activities while he was away. He had uncovered the identities of her lover, his family, and their respective workplaces, all included in the mass sharing of the damning content. While I'm uncertain about the aftermath for Sophia's lover and his marriage, Lucas's life took a tragic turn. Sophia initially sought reconciliation, but her disparaging remarks about Lucas's masculinity proved too hurtful to overcome. Lucas left her, gained substantial weight, relocated far away, and severed most friendships and family ties, becoming a bitter recluse. The next one is an entitled people story. When my wife and I bought our cozy little house on Oak Street last year, we thought we had found our perfect forever home. It was in a friendly neighborhood full of young families like ours. All the houses had big yards and beautiful old trees that provided plenty of shade. Everything was great at first. We bonded with our next-door neighbors, Dan and Kelly, over backyard barbecues and borrowed gardening tools. Their two little kids became fast friends with our son. It really felt like we were part of one big happy family. That is, until the day Dan decided he just had to have a swimming pool installed in their backyard. Don't get me wrong, I've got nothing against pools, but Dan went about this project all wrong from the very start. The first red flag was when the construction crew showed up before Dan had even pulled any permits from the city. I politely asked him about it while we were both out mowing our lawns one Saturday. "Permits? Nah, don't need any of that hassle," Dan scoffed. "My buddy owns the construction company and he said they'd take care of everything." In hindsight, that should have been my cue to call the city inspector's office right then and there. But Dan seemed so confident, plus I didn't want to cause friction with our new next-door buddies. So against my better judgment, I let it slide. Big mistake on my part. Over the next couple weeks, I watched in dismay as Dan's contractors dug a massive hole, installed a huge oval pool, and cemented in granite flagstones around the perimeter. No safety fence went up, no inspection ever took place, and the location could not have been worse. Dan had insisted on siting the pool right along the property line we shared, not even a foot back from the boundary. I finally worked up the nerve to raise more concerns when I ran into Dan one evening after work. "Are you sure you got permits for all this?" I asked. "Because the pool is awfully close to the property line. I'm worried about drainage issues." Dan laughed it off. "Drainage, schmeinage, that's their problem. I paid good money to put my pool exactly where I wanted. Don't sweat the small stuff, man." Arguing with him was useless, I realized, so I hoped for the best and prepared for the worst. And boy, did the worst come. Not 2 days after Dan's pool opened for swimming season, we got walloped by a huge thunderstorm. 4 inches of rain fell in just a few hours. At first I was thrilled. Our lawn sure needed the moisture after that dry spring. But soon the downpour turned from friend to foe. Water rushed in from Dan's yard like a tsunami, churning up against the house's foundation and flooding our basement. Then our backyard turned into a muddy lake, submerging my wife's flower garden completely. Our poor kid stood at the back door, wide-eyed and close to tears as all his outdoor toys floated by. When the storm finally passed, I raced outside to survey the aftermath. Just as I'd feared, Dan's pool had failed to drain properly and overflowed onto our property in a big way. My heart sank as I saw the damage. Basement walls soaked, yard a swampy mess, garden beds drowning. Before Kelly got home, I marched over to confront Dan. He at least had the decency to look ashamed when he saw my yard. "Geez, man, sorry about that. Crazy storm though, right?" I'd had it with his flippant attitude. "You knew that pool drainage was going to be an issue, but you ignored my concerns," I said, my frustration boiling over. "This isn't just an oh well situation for me, Dan. Your pool caused serious damage." Dan's bashful look hardened then. "Not my problem, you can't handle a little rain. I didn't do anything illegal. Pools are allowed here." He stormed off then, making it clear he felt zero responsibility for the destruction. After discussing it with my wife, we decided we had to take legal action. Dan obviously didn't care about wrecking our property, but maybe a judge could make him listen. With photos, repair estimates, and testimony from other neighbors, we presented a solid case against Dan in small claims court. Meanwhile, code enforcement finally caught wind of Dan's unpermitted pool and hit him with multiple violations. When we showed up in court, Dan didn't seem nearly so smug anymore. Turns out his pool didn't just lack proper permits, its placement also violated setback rules for drainage and flood prevention. Dan stammered and backtracked as the evidence mounted against him. I may have made some mistakes here," he admitted sheepishly. The judge agreed, and then some. Not only did we win damages to cover repairs, but she also ordered Dan to modify his pool's drainage and move it back from the property line. Either that or fill the whole thing in. Sweet justice. Dan ended up selling his house shortly after. I think our court case scared him off from wanting to fix the pool issues. The new neighbors are much more attentive to codes and drainage, and I make sure to give them a heads up anytime heavy rain is forecasted. No more unexpected backyard floods for us. This experience taught me that you can't trust people just because they seem friendly. I should have spoken up sooner about Dan's reckless pool planning. Next time, I'll go with my gut instead of giving a neighbor the benefit of the doubt. A little friction is better than a flooded basement any day. The next one is a petty revenge story. This happened a long time ago, before the internet was so popular. I'm a 43-year-old woman now, but I was 18 when this story began. My dad hasn't always been lucky in love. He raised my brother and me from the time I was 6 years old. Our first stepmother was and still is our mom, a title that is earned. He married our second stepmother in our early teens, but they split a few years later. Just after I graduated high school, he met STM3. I had a part-time job and was attending college classes at the age of 18. I paid rent and helped keep the house and our pets taken care of. Even before moving into our house, STM3 was constantly there, whether or not my dad was. My best friends happened to be males, and I worked with several others at a golf course. I had a couple of female friends, but they lived an hour away. My dad understood that my brother and I still had a good relationship with our mom and was supportive regardless of blood. STM3 would often corner me between classes and work shifts while my dad was at work. They hadn't married yet, but she would lecture me about my behavior. She accused me of being lazy and ungrateful and often tried to make me feel ashamed for being friends with and hanging out with guys. The funny thing was that at 18, I had never gone on a date or had sex. I paid $250 a month for rent, which I know isn't much, but I also kept the house clean and did everyone's laundry. I had 5 college classes that I paid for and worked 30 hours a week. I very rarely went out socially. When she began to accuse me of helping my dad hide other dating habits or girlfriends, I knew without a doubt this woman was nuts. STM3 claimed that I must have known about his relationships and calls to other women because I lived under the same roof as his daughter. I tried to explain how ridiculous that was, but she kept on. I warned my dad, but his rose-colored glasses prevented him from seeing the truth. After dating for a few months, they got married. Her son, my brother, and I all got along really well. Her son eventually even moved in with my male best friend. I was trying to save money, which is why I stayed in their house. Eventually, my car died, forcing me to quit school. Until I got another car, my best friend or his dad would get me to work, and a coworker brought me home. At that point, I worked 40 hours a week, still maintained the house, did laundry, even for STM3, and looked after all the animals. She had brought her dog and expected me to care for it too. Our little conversations became part of my daily routine. I tuned her out most of the time, but my dad seemed happy. After 2 miserable years, I moved out. One evening, I overheard my stepbrother on the phone with his girlfriend, who had recently moved back in. He mentioned that my best friend had called the house looking for him, but wasn't sure how my best friend knew where he was. I calmly mentioned that I had told him the last time we spoke. Apparently they had a falling out, but neither wanted to worry me, so they didn't mention it. Well, STM3 heard that and completely flew off the handle at me. At this point, I had one full-time day job, one part-time night job, and one family that I babysat for once a week. I was rarely home beyond cleaning and sleeping. Stam3 began ranting yet again about my laziness and how I wasn't grateful for being able to live there. She said I was always out with guys, allowing things to happen. Mind you, I was still a virgin. She said my late nights made them look bad and I needed to mind my own business and stop putting my nose where it didn't belong. My stepbrother tried to tell her that I had no idea he and my best friend had a falling out. He tried to explain that they agreed not to involve me, so I didn't know my best friend shouldn't have known where he was. Stam3 refused to listen. Usually, her rants took place when nobody was around. I hadn't been home a lot and avoided her whenever possible, so this was the first time my dad and stepbrother witnessed anything. I'm generally easygoing and patient, but that night was my breaking point. As I stood up, glaring at her, waiting for a moment to speak, I felt hands hold my shoulders and then my clenched fists. My stepbrother placed himself between us, faced me, and told me to breathe. At that moment, I looked at my dad and told him I loved him before apologizing. Then, holding my stepbrother's hand for support, I told Stam3 plainly that I would move out that night. I moved in with my best friend, with my stepbrother helping to explain why. A few months later, their marriage began to fall apart. She accused my dad of abuse, which her own son denied in court. She accused him of stealing her money, which the bank proved untrue. She accused him of having affairs, which was easily shown to be a lie. His work schedule and time at home, proven by nearby business cameras, showed he was always at one or the other. Here's where my petty side comes into play. Perhaps I am a bit harsh, but I simply don't care. I maintained a friendship with my stepbrother for a long time before losing touch. One day, while holiday shopping, I found something that immediately made me think of Stam3. She loved ornaments and Disney. I told my stepbrother what the item was and gave him the choice of whether she should receive it or not before handing it over. A few days later, Stam3 called to thank me for her gift. She was absolutely gushing over the ornament and how much it meant that I thought of her. I had the phone on speaker because my best friend and his parents were with me and knew about the gift. I could hear my stepbrother start laughing just as we all did. Then, the clueless woman realized why the gift of a Pinocchio Christmas ornament made me think of her. A little too late, she backpedaled, saying she understood the joke and how cruel it was. I know this was a long read, and I apologize, but the details did matter. My best friend and I still laugh about that ornament. It has become a favorite story to tell 22 years later. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So, my wife has some health problems and is fully certified and signed off on FMLA. That's the Family Medical Leave Act. For those not in the US, this is the big-time federal government. You do not mess with this medical leave. Her job knew this when she was hired, and they had flexible schedules. Whenever she had a flare-up, she'd take a few hours off and make up the time later in the week. Her boss knew this, was cool with it, and everything was great. Enter the new boss. After a couple of months, the new boss repeatedly told my wife, "You're doing great. No notes. Keep doing what you're doing." However, this new boss is an old-school boomer Karen, and my wife isn't afraid to stand up to her. She refuses to tolerate her nonsense, so it wasn't a total shock when a few months later, she was called into HR without notice or warning. HR tried to make a case about the FMLA, saying my wife wasn't filing her claims and was scamming the company. She responded, "One moment. I know an FMLA expert with 15 years of experience. Let me call him. Hey honey, you got a minute?" Did I mention I've worked with FMLA at a national corporate level for years? It finally came in handy. No, dear. FMLA counts as time worked. You've been flexing to make up your time, so it can't be counted against your FMLA limit. If you need to take FMLA, it's considered hours worked and does not need to be made up under federal law. They can insist you use PTO alongside it, but they can't tell you to make up the hours, or they're committing a felony. I could hear the silence on the phone. My wife finally spoke up. "So if the problem is that I haven't been properly applying for FMLA, I'll be happy to do so and stop making up my time. Karen, I'm going to have to push these projects back since I won't have as much time to work on them as I thought. If you want to authorize some overtime, we can work that out." It turned out Karen didn't like that my wife was working from home and couldn't be micromanaged. She thought HR would help scare her into submission, but they weren't prepared for someone who knew more about their claims than they did. Karen tried a few more times to assert her authority, but each time my wife responded with some variation of, "I am not legally allowed to do that, and I have been instructed by corporate to file all time as protected FMLA." Threats of discipline were met with, "Go ahead, I'm the only one who can do X job. I work here because I enjoy it, or at least I used to. Write me up if you feel the need, but please know that will be the start of my 2-week notice." She stuck to her guns. Whenever she needed to take FMLA time off, she did so and filed everything properly. Karen could only stew because there was nothing she could do about it. It's been about a month now. Karen has finally realized that she has no power. HR has gone completely silent, and things have gotten much better for my wife, who has less stress now. Karen keeps communications short, direct, and to the point, which my wife likes. Could they fire her for some unrelated reason after the current crunch is over? Sure, but she already has interest from several other companies, and we can afford for her not to work for a month or two if things go south. And of course, we have a giant cover-your-ass folder full of names, dates, and everything else documenting how Karen tried to retaliate and create a hostile workplace. Know your rights, people, and do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. The next one is an entitled people story. This is a bit of a long story, so I apologize in advance. There's a bit of backstory that is relevant. This story happened several years ago, around 2015. When I married my first husband, we bought a house built in 1960 with its original aluminum shingled roof. This is somewhat relevant later. The roof looked bad but was in good shape as long as you kept the leaves off it. After we got divorced, I kept the house and lived there until I moved in with my now husband. I kept the house empty for a couple years, checking on it regularly, just in case things didn't work out. During that time, I didn't clean the roof off and the leaf buildup caused a leak. This was immediately repaired and convinced me it was time to sell the house. I listed the house for just what I needed to pay off the mortgage and waited. In 3 months' time, I didn't get any serious offers, just investors that low-balled me. My realtor was getting really restless when finally I got an offer that wasn't terrible. We started negotiations. She immediately made it known that she was in the Air Force Reserves and retired from the Army or Marines, I forget which. My parents were in the Air Force, so that isn't something that I care about, and she wasn't getting special treatment from me for it. I'm used to people that use their military experience to get stuff. She was getting a VA loan, and at the time, that meant stricter requirements for inspections. She kept trying to get me to lower the price and finally used the roof leak against me. She claimed the roof needed to be replaced and found a roofer willing to back her up on it. It kind of forced my hand, so I agreed to pay half the expected replacement cost. But she didn't want that paid to the roofer. She wanted it paid directly to her. It was clearly an excuse to get the price lowered. It pissed me off, but there wasn't much I could do since I needed to sell this house. We finally agreed and the house was put under contract. Closing date set for a month away. The inspection started. After the first one, she asked for a few minor things to be fixed, which I did. Then we had the second inspection for the VA loan. This was about 3 weeks away from closing. I went by the house the day after, and as I pulled into the driveway, I found a package addressed to her in the mailbox, a metal shelf, and outdoor swing sitting in the driveway. I'm not happy, but more confused than anything. I then went into the house. The house is a tri-level, with the basement being just 5 steps down from the kitchen. The basement had been redone to be a primary bedroom prior to me buying it, but I only used it as a family media room. The first thing I noticed was the basement. She had completely rearranged it. There were IKEA wardrobe closet things she had pulled from the wall and ripped apart. They were screwed together, flipping them around. She had moved a mattress from the upstairs into the basement. The floor was damaged while they moved things around. Furniture was completely rearranged. Then I went upstairs to the bedrooms. I found cans of paint and packages of curtains in all the upstairs rooms. These are not my things, and I'm angry. The house isn't hers yet. She shouldn't be leaving things there or rearranging. I called my realtor, who called her realtor, who called her. It was relayed to me that she had dropped some things off outside. There were also bunk beds on the back deck that I hadn't seen yet, but she insisted she was never in the house. It's an obvious lie to cover the trespassing. I then went outside and found a circular burn in the grass, after which I found a burned paint stick inside the house. Now there's vandalism. In an effort to appease me, the buyer agreed to move up the closing date. It was supposed to be within a week. That ended up not happening, and we only closed 3 days early, on Monday instead of Wednesday. Other than the delays, nothing else happens until just before the closing date. On the Friday before, my realtor called me and said the buyer wanted to move in over that weekend instead of waiting for closing because she's military and doesn't get many days off and wouldn't be able to move until that next weekend. Not my problem. I immediately say no, not happening. The realtor called again later saying she's really pushing the military thing, she really wants to move in early, would I be willing to do a lease agreement? I again say absolutely not. I get another call saying that the buyer has now called anyone and everyone involved with the sale, the loan officers, insurance company, realtor broker, commanding officers, to try to find anyone that can force me to let her move in early. She was now threatening to not show up to closing if I didn't let her move in. I asked what would happen if she didn't show and was told that she would still have to pay the commissions for both realtors, and that since there was a contract, I could take her to court and force her to complete the sale. I again said she was not moving in early, and told my realtor that she could convey anything of what I was about to say to the buyer. I told her that I didn't press charges for the trespassing and vandalism because of the contract. If she failed to show up to closing, I would not only pursue all my legal rights regarding the contract, but I would also be contacting police about pressing criminal charges. I don't know how much of that was relayed, but I got a call a few minutes later that she would be showing up to the closing, but she wanted to sign her papers in a separate room. The closing went off without a hitch, and I'm glad to be rid of that house. I don't think she ever replaced the roof. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.